So rather than do 3 different PowerPoints, I just threw everything into one. So if I skip over things, that's just because I presume it will bore you, but it was designed for the next group that I'm talking to. So we'll go that way. First of all, I want you to know that the translation of the text has been butchered by everybody. The Laudato Si is translated most directly as "May you be praised." And as you know, it's the first line of the Canticle of the Son written by St. Francis of Assisi. So if you think about the song that you sing at church on Sunday, that's the first line of that song. Let's see, I translate Laudato Si, the Encyclical, not the Italian phrase of St. Francis. I translate the name of the Encyclical as "everything is related." It strikes me, I got a copy of I call it a bootleg copy of the Italian text. It was released 3 days early, so I snagged a copy of it and read it, and I was working with a committee of people who were preparing a national press conference on the Encyclical in Des Moines, and so I got this copy and I was translating it, and I was zipping off my notes to the rest of the committee as I was going through it. I remember getting halfway through the Encyclical and I stopped and I just wrote myself some notes, and the notes I wrote were, why is he not quoting any theologians? What is going on here? When are we going to see the theologians come to his assistance to explain what he's doing? And then I realized almost immediately, this is an encyclical like no other. He's not going to cite theologians very much at all. He is crafting a brand new theology, a brand new ethic that we haven't seen before. Thomas Aquinas, who's one of my heroes, has a moral theology which we could call recta ratio, which means right reason. What the Pope is doing is recta relatio, right relationships. So that's what I intend to demonstrate, that's what's going on in this encyclical. So we're going to do 3 things very briefly. What does he get from St. Francis? That's the answer that I won't bother reading to you. What is the theological core of the encyclical? And there's the answer that I won't bother giving you. And then what is so controversial about the Pope's teaching? So we're going to do those 3 things. What's he get from Francis? What's the theological core? And what's so controversial? In paragraph 15, if you want to jot, I don't care if you want to or not, but in paragraph 15, that's what these numbers will mean as you go through this. Paragraph 15 is when the Pope summarizes the 5 goals that he has for the encyclical, and that's what they are. But again, I'm not going to bore you with them here. I'm just going to talk about them as we go along. Skip all this. Let's see. Why don't we do this? Can you all read this? Can you all see it? Troy, can you read it? Going down there? You can? You wouldn't lie to the priest, would you? You are one. You know what happens. Why don't we just take, each person, take 2 or 3 lines, and then we'll just read, we'll pray the whole thing together. Would you start?
Here.
Yeah, Troy.
You know what? I don't know that I can see it.
So you can now. Why don't you start? Let's see how far we go.
Yeah.
Perfect yours it says, Most High Lord, you are present in the whole universe, and in the very least of your creatures. You who surround with tenderness all that exists, preserve within us the power of your love, so that we might take care of life and beauty.
Immerse us in the wave of peace, so that we might live as brothers and sisters without harming anyone.
Father of the poor, help us to redeem those abandoned and forgotten ones of this land who are so valued in your eyes.
Heal our lives, so that we may protect the world and not pillage it, so that we may show love and not pollution and destruction.
Touch the hearts of those who seek only their own advantage at the expense of the poor and of the land. Direct us to discover the value of each thing, to contemplate it with wonder, something to recognize that we are deeply united with all creatures. In our journey towards our infinite high
your infinite light.
In your
Sorry, the
infinite
screen's a
light.
little bit narrow.
Thank you, for you are with us all. You are with us all of our days. Sustain us, please, in our battle for justice, love, and peace.
If that doesn't sound like the translation you've heard, that's because it's my own. So the first thing to do is look at the introduction, and again, these are references to the paragraphs. What is he, right away he tells us who's talking, what he's talking about, why he's talking, and to whom he's speaking. And already he's instructing us, because it's not he, the Pope, who's talking. Right away, he unites himself with the bishops of the world, with the National Catholic Congresses of the world, and with his predecessors, especially John Paul II and Benedict. So he's not talking top down, I'm the boss, here's the way it is. He's saying, we all are having this conversation together. Obviously he's talking about the environmental crisis, the first encyclical ever written by a Catholic Pope, specifically and explicitly about the environment. He's doing it because he is invoking St. Francis of Assisi, the patron of the environment. Among other things, he's also the patron of peace. And he's speaking not just to Roman Catholics, but he addresses everyone. And it's a little less poetic than when Paul VI addressed in his document to all people of goodwill. Francis is much more basic. He just says, look, I'm talking to everybody on the planet. Doesn't sound very poetic, but at least it's straightforward and to the point. So chapter 1, if you just look at the notes, the introductory notes for chapter 1, you can see that there's 3 things going on even in chapter 1. And I put them in different colors because there are 3 different categories. He's talking about what's going on with the physical planet, but he also wants to talk about what's going on within the human community. So quality of life and weak relationships with one another, injustice, especially to the poor, those things are key on his mind just as much as his pollution, climate change, water quality, and other environmental issues. And then he sort of asks, do you know these terms, ecocentric and anthropocentric? Do you know these terms? Alex, you do?
I think so.
What are they? What's one mean?
Ecocentric has to do with the environment, the outside world, and anthropocentric is within.
Yeah, in environmental circles, the distinction is this. An anthropocentrist is concerned about the earth because it supplies resources that we need to live. An ecocentrist is concerned about the earth because it's the earth. Regardless of how valuable it is to us, it just has its own value. So the Pope is trying to say, well, look, this argument is nonsense. Those are both relevant and important topics. So in chapter 2, he shifts gears to talk about Scripture, and the reason he is a Roman Catholic and as the Pope is addressing this. So he pulls in Scripture and a little bit of theology, though not very much, to be honest. And then he pulls in insights from the sciences, which of course he has to do. I'm an environmental ethicist, and I wrote a book a few years ago on Thomas Aquinas and the environment. And I had to get reviewers for that book, and I had to find them myself. So I sought out 3 ecologists, not theologians, because I thought, I did get the theologians as well, but I didn't care so much about their opinions. What I needed to know is, if I'm going to do environmental ethics, I got to get the science straight. Because if I mess that up, or if I come across as ignorant or mistaken, no one is going to take me seriously, nor should they. So the Pope does immediately tap in to the sciences, but interestingly enough, he also taps into the humanities and to the arts, the entire range of our world. And I put a star by this because in chapter 2 is when he begins to talk about relationships for the common good, which turns out to be the center of his entire document. In chapter 3, he talks about the causes of the environmental problems. And even though I put the word technology on there, and he does come across really harsh, he's really, really afraid of technology. But if you read carefully, he does say, look, technology has done a lot of good, and besides that, we can't live without technology anyway, even if we should want to. But technology that's been unbridled, or worse, technology that has been bridled to a certain vision of economics that favor the wealthy and not the poor, this is what's causing environmental problems.
So he's not talking like artificial intelligence technology, more Globalization in economic term technology?
All of the above. He's worried about a world in which we are so technologically wired that we lose sight of one another and our relationships. If you were to walk across St. Ambrose University campus, you would marvel at the agility of people who are able to walk in a crowded sidewalk with their face in their cell phone and not engaging one another, you see. And that's what he's really concerned about. But absolutely, technologies that are bent to the service of a certain economy. You're going to find out the Pope is controversial, just not for the reasons people think he is. Chapter 4, he talks about this weaving together of environmental crises with social crises. In fact, he says explicitly, we have a social crisis and an ecological crisis, and these are not two crises, but two sides of the same coin. But by social, he doesn't just mean our social relationships. He also means our economic, our cultural, our spiritual, all of our relationships are at risk. And then finally, in chapter 5, he starts talking about strategies for solutions. And he says, everybody needs to do their bit. But this is me, this isn't the Pope. Each of us doing our bit isn't going to make a dang bit of difference. We should do our bit because it's the right thing to do. The Pope does say that in order for us to make any calculable difference, we have to do it at the international level. There has to be international agreements. He's writing this knowing, in July when it was issued, knowing that in December, the Paris Summit on the environment on climate change is taking place. And he wants this on their plates before they get to Paris. And then my favorite chapter, and when he talks about the relationship between faith and reason, between using our minds and also using our faith. And what does faith and religion have to offer to this problem? And he talks beautifully about the Trinity. One of my favorite units is there when he talks on the Trinity. He says, and by the way, this contradicts St. Augustine's theology of the Trinity, which that's not a bad thing. But anyway, the Pope says, each member of the Trinity offers something unique to God's creation. He doesn't exactly spell out what that is, but I think that would be worth a very prayerful consideration. Second, then he goes on from the Trinity, he shifts to talk about Christ, both human and divine, the incarnation, the uniting of the flesh and the spirit, means that the flesh, the world, matter is sacred. And he ends, by the way, he begins the first paragraph, he talks about Sister Earth, quoting St. Francis. The last paragraph, he talks about Mary, the mother of creation. Now the guy's an artist. He's not doing that by accident. It's really beautiful. So, other things I'd like to take a note to. He quotes John Paul II and Benedict XVI exactly 23 times each. Do you think that's an accident? I don't think he forced a quote to get it to exactly balance out. But what do you suppose is going on there? Why each of his two predecessors exactly the same number of times?
For equal power,
Pardon me?
To equal their significance?
Yeah. I think in the Catholic Church, John Paul II and Pope Benedict seem to be sort of perceived as sort of polar opposites. They're not alike at all. And to the extent that if you really like one, you probably really don't like the other, by contrast. And Francis is saying, no, they're both right here together with me. I'll give you an illustration. I'll give you two illustrations. Catholic environmental theology was born on October 4th, 1979 in Iowa. When the Pope came to Living History Forums, he gave a homily. I happened to be there. I was holding his hat, actually. He gave a homily on care for God's creation. It's the first papal statement explicitly dedicated to our care for the land. It's uncanny to think that I was an 18-year-old kid at the time, 19-year-old kid at the time, And I would go on to become a priest, and then I would go on to be an environmental ethicist, and I would go on to do this work, and I would go on to write my dissertation about John Paul II's environmental theology, and only then would I discover that, oh my God, I heard it, I was there. In balance, and Benedict XVI has been dubbed by the secular press the Green Pope. And in his encyclical, Spes Salvi, he takes a big chunk of his encyclical to talk about the environment. And for the first time, not even more so than John Paul II, for the first time, Benedict talks about the intrinsic value of the earth, not only its instrumental value. In other words, not only the anthropocentric point of view, but now more thoroughly the ecocentric position. So 17 bishops' conferences, 9 of which are from the developing world. His own earlier texts. He quotes the Catholic Catechism. He quotes almost no theologians. My dear friend Thomas Aquinas gets snubbed. He's cited only twice in the entire encyclical. He cites a Sufi mystic, for crying out loud. He cites Dante, Francis, of course, and Chardin. He doesn't need them because he's doing this himself. Now, I'm not going to bore you with this, except to show off that I did this. I counted these words. Am I in your way? Here, let's just go to the details here. One of the things that Catholic scholars do is recount words. So it doesn't matter that he uses the word creation or its cognates 248 times. It's the most used word or idea in the encyclical, which stands to reason because that's what the encyclical is about. He talks about overconsumption 30 times. He talks about climate change only 12 times. See the difference? One of the reasons the Pope has gotten in a great deal of trouble with the secular press, actually, no, that's not quite right. The secular press wants the Pope to get in trouble. I was being interviewed by CBS on campus in July, and the interview was over. And these guys are really professional. They have a cameraman on me. They have another cameraman on the interviewer. It's really cool the way they do it. And so we're done. And one of the cameramen says, "Hey, ask him another question." And the guy says, I don't have any more questions. I said, "What are you talking about? You haven't even asked me what is the core idea of this text." Well, all right then. What is the core idea of this text? So the core idea of this text is that the rich have been taking the world's resources to the detriment of the world and the poor and future generations, and that we have to shift the burden of responsibility off of the shoulders of the poor, the earth, and future generations, and put that yoke on our shoulders. This is my term, not the Pope's, but I call it redistributive suffering. And cameras on, mics are live, and the journalist looks at me and he says, good luck with that. End of interview. That didn't make the press that day. Climate change, they want us to talk about climate change more than a third, 8 out of 24 presidential candidates. 8 are Roman Catholic. Most of them are conservative, and all but one denies the reality of climate change. And the one that doesn't deny it, did deny it, and now, he came out saying, yes, it's real, but now that he's running for president, he's not so sure anymore. And then he talks about overpopulation exactly 0 times. I need you to reflect for a second and see if you think there is any significance to the fact that climate change is only mentioned 12 times and that overpopulation is not mentioned at all. When Tommy took my class, I'm pretty sure that I told the class that there are 2 primary causes of ecological crises: overpopulation and overconsumption. Overpopulation being a problem primarily of the developing world, and overconsumption being a problem primarily of the developed world. Why doesn't the Pope tackle one of the 2 prongs of the environmental crisis? Why does he completely ignore overpopulation?
Because the contribution is so much less than the contribution made by developing the developed world.
Yeah. Any others? Oh, come on, Tommy's not really recording, it just looks like it. You can say whatever you want. Is he copping out?
I don't think so.
Go
There
say
are
more
ample
then.
resources to manage parts of the world and people and take care of the world with the population as it is.
Yeah,
Consumption.
yeah.
We have the technology to deal with consumption. Overpopulation, then you get into, and maybe I'm totally off base on this, but you get into the sanctity of life.
Right, and that's what he's really going after. In fact, when he doesn't talk about overpopulation by the word, but it does talk about it, I believe it's in paragraph 50, when he says, look, we've been, those people who want to blame the poor for having too many children are simply trying to dodge responsibility. That's what he's really saying there. We should understand that the Catholic Church, if the Catholic Church is going to talk about birth control, and if the Catholic Church is going to stand up against abortion, the Catholic Church must take seriously the question of overpopulation. We have an obligation to do that, otherwise it just looks like we're saying, oh, sail that boat right off the edge of the world, right? But in this encyclical, the Pope is saying what several of you had already observed, that blaming the poor is a cop-out. He doesn't think, well, it's tricky. It's really tricky. By and large, he says that overpopulation is a regional problem more than a global problem. In other words, there are parts of the world that are overpopulated, but not necessarily the world. On the other hand, we are 7-something billion, and by mid-century we'll be 9 billion. Some estimates go as high as 11 billion. We read an article in the Guardian newspaper out of Great Britain, which, by the way, is one of the greatest pieces of journals in the world in the English language, in my opinion. And they say that the population, those are extreme predictions, and we won't get that far for a variety of reasons. But the most important one is this: the world is consuming at a rate 50% greater than the carrying capacity of the earth already. Now, that's not individual discrete countries. I looked it up today on of all sources, the World Bank site. The United States consumes 7 times as much as the second most consumptive power on earth, which is China, even though we are 1/6 of their size.
When you talk about consume, what are you?
Yeah, that's a really important question. That's a great question. The World Bank is talking about buying. It's just talking about our buying, how much money we spend to buy stuff. Yeah. The Pope, when he talks about consumption, he calls it a throwaway culture.
Oh, okay.
Yes. I don't want to offend, but we could call it the Walmartization of our economy. Buy cheap, throw it away, go back and get something else. Okay, so relationships and cognates, that word's used 102 times. The idea of duty and responsibility is 40 times, and the words Democrat and Republic are used exactly 0 times. So we're in front of the TV cameras, we're in Ankeny, and we've been spending 4 months preparing for this, and this journalist gets up and says, you know, this question, and the Bishop of Des Moines, who has lost his voice and therefore isn't talking, leaned over to me because he knew I was going to be able to take this question. And then this guy tried to interview me last night. He's trying to make this all political. You tell him it's not about Democrats or Republicans. And I'm freaking out because I got to listen to the question because I'm about to answer it. So I got up to the mics and I said, just what I told you. We theologians count words. The number of times the Pope uses the word Democrat and Republican is exactly 0 times. The Pope is not political. Why does he only mention climate change 12 times? Because I'm not going to get, he is thinking, I'm not going to get dragged down into a mud wrestling match with a bunch of climate change deniers. It's real, it's advanced, it's anthropogenic. That's all there is to it. He trusts the consensus of the scientific community and moves on.
A question would be that could be posed by media on September 24th when he presents to Congress, what will the message be? And of this, what portion do you think he'll give as far as care for creation?
International cooperation. Listen, I've been reading a lot of, I'm really trying to understand why climate change deniers deny climate change, because the evidence is so ridiculously overwhelming. I'd like to tell people, you don't trust 98+% of consensus of the global scientific community on climate change, but you take medicine, you eat GMO foods, and you get onto airplanes. None of which you could do if you didn't trust science. So why don't we trust the science? And actually just this afternoon, I was reading some blogs, and this guy spelled it out very succinctly. When climate change was first emerging as an issue, Republicans attacked it because it implied big government. It will take more government control in order to address climate change. And of course, Republicans don't like big government, and so they started to resist this. And that was the little snowball that has turned into an avalanche. They originally didn't deny climate change. They questioned it for the sake of slowing down the argument because they don't like big government, which of course is a very legitimate concern. So I thought to myself, again, just today, I thought, well, that's it. If we could just get to the root of the problem, the fear of big government, and try to address climate change and ecological crises without big government, then we would get everybody on board and we would just dodge around this entire issue. I'm in Bluegrass, it's a farming community. Nobody there will use the word climate change. Some of the most conservative, God bless them, salt of the earth, successful farmers in my parish deny climate change, and then in the next breath will tell me what new hybrids they're buying to account for the changing weather conditions. See? It's just the word that's a dirty word. In any case, I thought about it just a little bit more, and I thought, oh, actually, it will take massive government involvement to get this done. Massive. I don't like that, but I don't see any way out of
When
it.
you talk about the farmers using hybrids or the GMOs, does Pope Francis have a stand on that?
Yeah, he does actually. Funny enough, he's in favor of GMOs.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Why?
I'm a farmer.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, it explicitly says it's a difficult question, it's a complex moral question, but in the long run, it feeds people. How can you argue with feeding people?
And it's something we've been doing for 30, 40, 50 years.
Well, if you
we found a faster way to do it.
yeah, right. Yeah, we've been doing it
It's
since.
really, honestly, all it is.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, so, all right. I won't belabor this, but the Pope also ties himself to the long tradition of the Catholic social teaching that goes back all the way to Rerum Novarum in 1891. And those are the documents, and those are a summary of the key themes of each document. Starting in 1891, when the Pope was terrified of the emergence of communism in the world, which was pulling the working class away from church and religion, he wrote this encyclical saying people have a right to organize. And what he meant by that, well, he called it the right of association, but it was the right to use church basements to start unions. That's what he was talking about. And from 1891, we had just been gathering energy and laying down layers of our Catholic social teachings, all the way up to, and now including this one as the most recent iteration of it. Let's see, I already mentioned that he talks about philosophers, scientists, theologians, civic groups, Orthodox patriarch Dante, Paul Ricoeur, and a 9th century Sufi mystic. Dresses himself to everybody in the time, I've already covered all that. What's this? Oh, but then he says he's not trying to say the final word, he's trying to have a conversation. He's very non-hierarchical, which is funny for a pope, because that's like the most hierarchical position on the planet. I would like to point out that the text is just written beautifully. It is the most readable encyclical I've ever attempted, and at the same time, it is the most stirring, the most evocative. His language is very, very powerful. What's one there? common home, irrational confidence in progress, a throwaway culture. We are not God. The Bible has no place for tyrannical anthropocentrism. Nice, powerful, no holds barred, straight out of his heart language. Okay, I'm going to skip these. Anybody want to read this? This is a footnote, and it turns out to be, I think, one of the most interesting statements he makes in a footnote. You got to read the footnotes. Want to read it, somebody? If I move the screen a little bit. There.
Nor is,
Somebody
light, nor is the light of faith joined to the truth of love,
extraneous.
extraneous to the material world. For the love is always lived out in body and spirit. The light of faith is incarnated light radiating from the luminous life of Jesus. It also illuminates the material world, trusts its inherited order, and knows it is calls us to an even wider path of harmony and understanding. The gaze of science thus benefits from faith. Faith encourages the scientist to remain constantly open to reality in all its inexhaustible richness. Faith awakens a critical sense by preventing research from being satisfied with its own formulae and helps it to realize the nature is always greater. By stimulating wonder before the profound mystery of creation, faith broadens the horizons of reason to shed greater light on the world which discloses itself to scientific investigation.
What he's talking about there is the relationship between faith and reason, which it has been the hallmark of the Catholic intellectual tradition since at least the 12th century. When Thomas Aquinas said, look, I'm not afraid of your mind. I'm not afraid of your rational inquiry. Ask any question that you want. Christ cannot be harmed by any question that you ask. You can only be harmed by not asking it. So science and faith work together to do God's work, I think. Okay, what did I do, Hannah? How do I fix it? All right. So you mentioned, I lost your name. Sam. Sam was talking about what technology is. He says it's tremendously useful, but it creates a fractured, narrow, materialistic, and utilitarian way of thinking that leads to the exploitation of nature, society, and even of the nations, right? So you get guys who say, that mountain's in our way. Well, John Deere can fix that. We'll just bulldoze it, right? So this sort of, this overweening use of technology. All right, what's the difference between quality of life and standard of living? Have you ever considered that distinction before? And what is it?
One's joy and the other's things.
One's joy and the other is? Things? Yeah. What's the relationship? Is there a relationship between standard of living and quality of life?
There shouldn't be.
There should not be?
There shouldn't be.
What do you mean?
I can be in the poorest region of Africa, and I can have tremendous quality of life because I'm happy. My standard of living may be below zero, but I have tremendous quality of life because in the space that I'm at, I'm not attached to the material goods of the world.
So that begs the question, which is?
Can you have both?
I'll go with that for just a second. Social scientists investigating this question say that $50,000. If you anybody makes lower than $50,000 has a reduced quality of life. But once you make $50,000, the contribution of wealth to your quality of life diminishes rapidly. I don't like that reasoning because for many reasons, one of which is the people who did the study don't define happiness. They allow the interviewee to define happiness any way they want. In fact, they don't even ask them what their definition is. And then they do their study. I don't like that because I think we ought to be able to define happiness, which was the question that was begging there.
goes with that, though.
Yeah, like,
Well, like, is there a hospital, do your children go to school?
Yeah.
Do you have paved roads, do you have running water? Do you
Yeah.
have electricity, do you own a home? Those kinds of things.
I can't-
Oftentimes, yes,
I
do you
can't-
have enough to eat?
I can't help but think of this Syrian man who grabbed a hold of a capsizing boat and then realized he needed to grab a hold of his wife and children and did so, only to discover that they had already drowned. And the body of his 5-year-old son washed up on the shores of Turkey this afternoon. And they found him. He's in Germany, I think, or maybe Denmark. I can't remember. They found him, and they had to tell him that they found the child's body. And he said, "My children are the most beautiful children on earth." What's quality of life if you lose your children? What's quality of life if you're a refugee? So the point is, there is some sort of relationship between the world, the material world in which you live, the access to clean drinking water and safe streets and an education and healthcare and quality of life. There sure is. But after that, okay. I don't know how much time we have or how far we're going to get with this. This is kind of important. He never uses the phrase seamless garment. That's a phrase that was made popular by Archbishop Bernardin of Chicago, right? Who talked about the seamless garment. It comes from Matthew 26, I think. You know what the reference is? When Jesus is on the cross and the Roman soldiers are gambling for his clothes, and the one guy says, "Look, don't tear that, because it turns out it's made of a seamless thread, so let's just roll dice for it." So Bernardin captured this phrase. He didn't invent it, he got it from somebody else, I can't remember who. And the seamless garment teaching is that when you tug on one thread, the whole fabric unravels. So what are the threads? The environment, social relationship, economic relationships, cultural relationships, and spiritual relationships. They're all interwoven together. So that to have one is to have them all. To threaten one is to threaten them all. Which is the fundamental reason why this encyclical is written, because nobody's been talking about the environmental thread. So, solutions. He does subscribe to the great Catholic doctrine of subsidiarity, which means that problems ought to be solved at the lowest level in which they can be solved. If the little kid next door is cutting across your yard and stomping into your bushes, you don't call the National Guard, right? You start with his parents and work from there. Subsidiarity. Local actions are necessary. He talks beautifully and poetically about Favola in Rio, where he visited, where the women of the community, which is ravaged by drugs and gangs and poverty, go around and clean up all the graffiti off the walls and plant gardens in all of the abandoned public spaces, and they're turning their little neighborhood into this oasis of quality of life in the worst of all possible circumstances. They are, in fact, changing their environment. And he applauds that. But he goes on to say that ultimately it's going to require such massive networking of the social, economic, and political threads that's going to require international cooperation. And he gets even more serious about it than that. By the way, that picture. These pictures have had meaning. I just didn't bother pointing them out, but this one I will. This is the chapel of San Damiano, just outside of Assisi in Italy. It is where Francis went to pray when he was realizing that he was not going to be a great warrior, he was not going to be a great merchant, and he didn't know what he was going to be. So he went to this hovel, this ruined chapel, and the crucifix was still hanging in the wall, and he prayed, and he had a vision, and Christ from the cross said, "Francis, repair my church." And Francis got all jacked up and started borrowing money. He actually stole it from his father. He got help, and he rebuilt the chapel. And then he got finished with the chapel, and he was kind of cleaning up, and he thought, "Oh, you didn't mean the church, you meant the church." So he went off to Rome. All right, so this could be the most interesting. These are the questions I've already gotten. I've been doing this circuit now since July. Why doesn't the Pope stick to Catholic issues? Any answer to that?
This is a Catholic issue.
Pardon me?
This is a Catholic issue. It deals with the entire world, so and we're part of the entire world, the churches. So to me, this is a Catholic issue. If you want to term it that.
Rick Santorum, and I'm not trying to get political here, but the man said it, so it's worth observing. He's a Catholic running for president of the United States. And when the Encyclical came out, the press, of course, trying to bait him, said, what do you think of the Pope's coming down in favor of climate change? And he said, well, I think the Pope should leave the science to the scientists. Footnote, the Pope taught chemistry classes in the footnote. Should leave science to the scientists, and we should do, notice the plural, first person plural, we should do what we do best, which is morality and spirituality. So then the question becomes, is this a moral spiritual issue?
We meaning Catholics? Or we meaning,
Well, if you accept Santorum's statement that what we Catholics, or what you could easily enlarge that, what Christians, what religious people do well is morality and spirituality, and the Pope should stick to that. What would be your response?
Go back to Francis.
Pardon me?
Go back to Francis. Oh, you meant that? Sure. It's the same thing.
Yeah. You meant that earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, you meant that incarnation.
It is a Catholic issue, but that's big C and also little c.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, if he wants this to be an international thing, well then yeah, it becomes a little c. It becomes a Catholic issue in that sense.
Yeah.
But that includes us in the international
Right,
community.
right. I would just refer people back to chapter 6, when it talks about the Trinity, the incarnation of Christ, and the Blessed Mother. And the Eucharist, by the way. What is the Eucharist? It is God in matter. I know I'm not supposed to do this, and I shouldn't admit it, but I already admitted to the Archbishop in Dubuque a few nights ago. When I consecrate the Eucharist, I have my own personal prayer. You're not supposed to add to or detract from the prayers of the sacramentary, but I have a prayer that I say every time I consecrate the Eucharist, and the prayer is this: if this isn't holy, nothing is holy. Since this is holy, all things are holy. And to me, that is what the Eucharist is. The Eucharist makes holy everything. So it is a Catholic thing, I would say. Don't tell the bishop. Okay. So, what's the controversy? Well, one of the controversies is that he dares to say that religion matters. It's not just a question for politicians. It's not just a question for scientists, but it is a spiritual question that should be taken into consideration. He calls for great political courage. And by the way, if you're going to ask me what we should do, we're Iowans. We have the first caucus in the country. We should be asking our candidates, do you take environmental crises? Forget the word climate change. It's already too incendiary a term. We can forget it. Do you take environmental issues seriously, and what will you do about it? This is a Catholic issue. This is a life issue. This is a human issue. What are you going to do about it? I gave a talk in Illinois a couple of years ago, and there was a state senator in the audience. And I didn't know that ahead of time, but I found out that he was in the audience, and I said, you know what we can do? We can not punish our politicians for standing up and telling us we need to do uncomfortable things in order to turn this around. If we're going to vote out of office people who say, oh, look, this stuff is serious, it's advanced, and it's going to be expensive to fix it, so sorry about that. Are we going to re-elect them? And I know I mentioned this before, but the shift of suffering from the poor, from the earth and the future to us, That's just has to happen. It's a matter of justice. It's a matter of our fundamental faith principles. All right. Other questions? Okay, should he have stayed clear of the environment? His answer is in paragraph 229. We need one another. We have a shared responsibility for others and for the world. And that being good and decent are worth it. I love that. It's just so down to earth. Being good and decent are worth it. I love that. We've had enough of immorality and the mockery of ethics, goodness and faith and honesty. It is time to acknowledge that light-hearted superficiality has done us no good. When the foundation of social life are corroded, what ensues are battles over conflicting interests, new forms of violence and brutality, and obstacles to the growth of a genuine culture of care for the environment. How is the Laudato Si related to our ethic of respect for all life? Let's see if I can put that on the screen. Here's the quote. Since everything is interrelated, concern for the protection of nature is also incompatible with the justification of abortion. How can we genuinely teach the importance of concern for other vulnerable beings, however troublesome or inconvenient they may be, if we fail to protect the human embryo, even when its presence is uncomfortable and creates difficulties? If personal and social sensitivity towards the acceptance of new life is lost, then other forms of acceptance that are viable for society also wither away. We need to develop a new synthesis capable of overcoming the false arguments of recent centuries. Christianity and fidelity to its own identity and to the rich deposit of truth which it has received from Jesus Christ continues to reflect on these issues in truthful dialogue with changing historical situations. In so doing, it reveals its eternal newness. In other words, we can and should revisit questions that we once thought were answered, but in all things, we should have a seamless care for life. By the way, the Pope is making, philosophically, he's making a claim here that is debatable. In college education classes, they call it transfer of learning, but it's sort of the perverse opposite of that. If you're mean to a dog, does that make you more likely to be mean to a person? That's the philosophical argument that is being claimed here. Okay. Has it become too politicized? I think I already cited this in paragraph 132. The correct framework for any reflection concerning human intervention on plants and animals, which at present includes in genetic manipulation by biotechnology. That's paragraph 132, 133 is when he talks about GMOs and he's okay with that, or at least qualified okay with it. Which all at present includes genetic manipulation of biotechnology for the sake of exploiting the potential present and immature reality. Respective all owed by faith to reason, calls for close attention to what the biological sciences, through research uninfluenced by economic interests, can teach us about biological structures, their possibilities, and their mutations. So he wants us, people of faith, to not just plug our ears to science, but to engage in it. This is just for interest. These are the religious affiliations of the political candidates in both parties. What do you notice? Yes, we don't know if Biden's going to run. That's why he's in parentheses. But Catholics dominate. Statistically speaking, on just that alone, there's a really good possibility the next president's going to be Catholic.
Or Christian.
Yeah, Sanders is a Jew, is Jewish, but he's not practicing. Fiorina and is it Jack? I don't know what's Webb's first name. Anyway, they're non-denominational. They don't claim any particular church affiliation.
Whose judgment is that these folks?
Pardon me?
Whose judgment is it that these folks?
I got this off of a website, which was a political website that asks that question.
It's a little bit sarcastic, my comment.
Oh, I see.
I don't know whether the Presbyterians, other than Paul, might include Trump.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting because the article even said that we're not really sure about Trump, but he claims to be a Presbyterian. And he said the Bible is the most important book that he owns. When somebody asked him, well, what book of the Bible is it that you like? He goes, oh, I like them all. Well, like the Old Testament, the New Testament, oh, I like them both.
What has been the response of other major faiths to the encyclical?
I don't know, except that I can tell you very anecdotally that a lot of non-Catholics are coming to talks like this, which says a lot. I think it's this conversation is transcending any sort of Catholic context.
And I can speak from experience. I have a family member who was raised Catholic, has fallen away from the church, and is anti anything religion. And he's like, your Pope's awesome. He's talking about climate change. He's talking about stuff that he brings in the political aspect of it. He's talking about stuff that you Republicans don't talk about. So it's bringing Democrats over to our side, in a sense.
Yeah, and it's alienating. It is alienating. Some, I won't tell you which diocese I was recently invited to speak at. I was invited to do a day-long workshop with the priests of the diocese on this. And I said, well, of course, I'd love to do that. And they said, oh, well, that's great. That's very courageous of you. Whoa, what? Why is it courageous to talk to a bunch of priests? And he says, well, nobody in this diocese will ever preach this from the pulpit. Nobody accepts climate change, and everybody hates the Pope, including the bishop. By the way, I can't formally invite you until I clear you with the bishop, and there's a reasonable chance he won't allow you to come.
Sioux City?
I won't.
That's the same thing I deal with my family member, you know. We're a Catholic family, tend to vote Republican, tend to be conservative. He tends to be very liberal, and now he loves to come to us and be like, well, your Pope says this. And I'm like, I'm not denying that there's punishment. I'm not denying any of that. I think what he's doing is awesome, but that doesn't mean being conservative is a bad thing.
Yeah, yeah.
He's trying to make you. Some of these people, and he's one of them, try to make it out that like, oh,
Yeah.
if we're not following our Pope, then we're.
I had a meeting with the bishop today, and I asked him, he was talking about, frankly, he said he has a really hard job, and he just wishes he could go back and teach second grade. And I said, well, are we over the hump? I mean, are we sort of back in a good place? And he says, yeah. He says, I deal with a lot of, he says, the problem is I get a lot of hate mail, both from this extreme and that extreme, and that's not fun. Unfortunately, we are, as it turns out, America is not nearly as polarized as the press wants us to be, but we're constantly bombarded with polarizing rhetoric. You can't possibly be that, otherwise you can't ever, be there. So anyway, of the climate change in green, I'm sense of humor. If the names in green acknowledge anthropogenic climate change, the names in white say no, and then those guys, Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, Jim Gilmore, and Bobby Jindal, used to say yes, but now they're saying no, or at least we're not so sure.
I saw an article that I didn't realize that the people that have CitiCard, the credit card company, I didn't know that they did studies, but the study was talking about if we do nothing, or if we don't do it quickly enough, the cost to the economy or the world economy, and it was, it's not just the politicians, it's not just people of faith. There's big business that are running numbers and hedging bets and buying tracts of land in South America, and so the business world understands it, and they're moving forward, and they're not concerning with the squabble.
I've lost his name. He's a really good writer. He's an Australian. He was head of Amnesty International for a number of years, and they just got burnt out constantly fighting the man, as we used to say. And then he reinvented himself as a consultant, and lo and behold, he finds out that he's very, very, very popular with huge international corporations. They pay him a lot of money to talk to their high-end administrators and staff, and he found that if he just said certain things like platitudes because he's walking on eggshells, they would agree and nothing would change. But if he started to get all aggressive and get in their faces, all of a sudden, I mean, their business genome kicks in, and they start to think, all right then, what can we do about this? And then they start putting their heads together and figuring out solutions. So this guy started to realize that multinational corporations are way out in front of most governments in climate change. They're not debating it anymore. They're just acting as if it's the next reality. And I believe the United States military is doing the same thing.
Right.
So people who can just sort of put the politics aside, they're just trying to find solutions.
I had an elected official at the national level regarding the clean energy plan that the administration has proposed, which the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is in support of, consistent with this, say the staffer said the representative, I'm talking in general terms so as not to give, would not be in favor of this because China won't play fair. And if they're not going to play fair, it would put us at a competitive disadvantage to do anything that you're proposing.
I have a response to that. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I'll couch it in very contemporary terms. On the way down here, I was listening to the radio. Germany has just agreed to invite something like 80,000 immigrants into Germany. England has invited, I think, 3,000 or 4,000, and is now closing the doors. And what they find is that, well, look at this country. You have open immigration, and all of a sudden your economy thrives. People are entrepreneurs, they're making businesses, they're giving people work, they're paying their taxes, and it's good for everybody. If you close the doors and try to keep people out, then the very thing that you're trying to protect begins to erode. In the Catholic Church, and you know this because you had my class, in the long history of the Catholic Church, when we have been open, when we have been inviting, when we have been unafraid, we have done really well. When we get defensive and frightened and concerned about the evils of secular society and close our doors, then we do very poorly. It turns out that being generous and open and welcoming is economically, socially expedient.
Germany has a reason to do that, though, too. I think their demographics are such that they need people to work that do manual labor. And I heard a larger number than that today. I was heard that it was
hundreds of thousands, 400,000.
Yeah.
Me and numbers have never been particularly close friends.
But they need people to work, and who, by most majorities, will take the lowest paying job they have.
But it does go beyond that. I mean, I couldn't help but think when they were talking about
that's
that.
another reason.
You know, from the Catholic perspective, you know, our Irish, German, and Italian ancestors came over here and did all the crap work. And now we've got 8 people running for president.
I'm surprised China doesn't open up too, because China's having a problem too. And, you know, they're farming a lot of, you know, manufacturing into Vietnam and Cambodia.
Merkel's position, I find Ms. Merkel's position really very interesting, and a very short sentence or small number of sentences she's saying to her population very boldly. Watch out, we're not going to talk that way.
Yeah.
You know, she
Well, it
doesn't
is dangerous
refer back
back.
to World War II,
Right.
where you can feel it all through your bones.
Yeah.
That takes some courage.
Yeah.
Going back to the statement as far as competitiveness, I believe, Mike, you can probably back me on this if I'm wrong or straighten me, but I think China is probably put up more windmills and more solar than the United States. If not, they're second.
Denmark has put up more solar, or wind generators than we have.
And also where China is like way far ahead of what their clean air.
What's that again?
China's like way far ahead in what they wanted
Well,
for their clean air.
in some respects, but let's face it, they are still the number one polluter on Earth.
Oh,
And if
so
you can't
for
walk
them
around.
for them to do something is.
Yeah, right. In order for them to have their big celebration of the end of World War II, they had to tell the local population to stay in homes so that they wouldn't drive, so that the pollution wouldn't be too bad for the parade. It's not good. It's not good. Let's see, I was gonna do just really quickly here, and it's probably tedious and boring and not worth it, but just as a matter of fact, the last, well, it just came out a few weeks ago. 2014 is the warmest year ever recorded. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that in the last 20 years. 19 out of the last 20 years are the warmest years ever recorded. I'll bet you if we went back another decade, we'd say probably like 27, 28 of the last 30 years of the warmest ever recorded.
Is that like based on like a global average temperature?
Yes, it is. And that's the way they're all done. Which is why every year I get it. I'm walking across camp and it's 5 below zero, and some kid comes up and says, "Oh, what about global warming?" I said, "Shut up," and I hit him, and then I move on. Because it's a global average. It can't be based. I mean, it was a mild summer here. I don't have air conditioning. I didn't need it. It was a very mild summer this summer in Iowa, at least in eastern Iowa anyway. So it is real and it is advanced, and the IPC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, when I first started studying these documents 20 years ago, they talked about if we don't do this, then this will happen. Now the last two documents, going back for the last 5 years, maybe even 10 years, the vocabulary has changed so that now they're saying, okay, now it's about mitigation and adaptation. It is happening. It is so advanced that we can't stop it. Mitigation and adaptation. By the way, both of those words appeared in President Obama's second inaugural. Nobody noticed it, but it's pretty shocking that that would make speech time in an inaugural address. Okay. Biodiversity is threatened by climate change, by invasive species. It just goes on and on and on. Some people from World Watch, for example, say that the loss of biodiversity is probably a greater threat to us than climate change. Pollution, air, water, ground, everything. That's downtown Dhaka, by the way. 7th most populous country on the planet, and half of the country is underwater half the year. Deterioration in quality of life. So there is a connection between what goes on in the environment and what goes on with people. This is actually interesting. I don't want to bore you with it, but you'll notice that there are fewer very poor people. This statistic is going down. So people are getting wealthier, except it seems to sort of stall here at middle income. Now, middle income on a global basis is less than $20. $20 of what? I don't know if it's a day or a week. I don't remember. And yet it remains true. This is the United States. The highest 20% of the income control. This is interesting. The top 1% of Americans has 63% of the wealth and only 5% of the debt. The bottom 90% of Americans has only 6% of the wealth, but 74% of the debt. So generally speaking, 41% of the wealth is controlled by 1%. In America, here's another graphic. This is global. The blue figure represents number of people. So that's 68.7% of the population is the largest human figure, with 3% of the world's wealth. And you can see where the spectrum shifts from there. what does he hope that the governments will do? By the way, I read this thing in Italian originally, and it's important to understand that in the Italian, the word politics, generally speaking, means government. It doesn't have the pejorative ring that it does, at least in Iowa, during an election year. He really means governments. Stronger, more flexible, and efficiently organized international institutions. And by that, he doesn't mean only political institutions, he also means economic institutions. All right, and what's it mean for Iowa? I think we won't go into that. Let's just finish up here. Who was the last person to pray? Can you start reading, please?
Yep. We praise you, Father, with all of your creatures that proceed from your powerful hand. They are yours and are full of your presence and of your tenderness. May you be praised.
I'm gonna skip because I forgot my glasses.
Okay.
So
I'm perfectly, I get you right there. So,
Son of God, Jesus, by you are we are created all things. You took from in the material womb of Mary. You are made part of the land, and you have seen this world with human eyes. Today you are alive in every creature. With the glory of your resurrection, may you be praised.
can you read from over there?
It's very blurry for me.
Okay. Anybody, or should we start over here again? Start over here? Holy Spirit?
Holy Spirit, with your light, direct this world toward the love of God, and attend
Attend to the moon.
of creation. You also live in our hearts to
Nudge us.
nudge us toward the good. May you be praised.
Lord God, one in triune, wondrous community of infinite love, direct us to contemplate you in the beauty of the universe, where all that is speaks of you.
Awaken our praise and our gratitude for each being that you've created. Give us the grace of sensing ourselves to be intimately united with all that exists. God of love, show us our place in this world as instruments of your affection for all the beings of this land, since not even one of these are forgotten by you.
Enlighten the masters of power and money, so that they do not fall into the sin of indifference, so that they love the common good, assist the weak, and have care for this world that we
Inhabit.
The poor of this land are crying out. Lord, seize us with your power and your light to protect each life, to bring forth a better future, until the coming of your kingdom of justice, of peace, of love, and of beauty. May you be praised. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.